Hey guys, tonight we drift all the way back to the ancient city of Nineveh, where the air is heavy with the scent of baked clay tablets and the occasional whiff of donkey dung. You're about to walk through the palace halls of a boy who preferred books over battles, which in Assyria is basically the least practical career path imaginable. You probably want to survive this, lest you count dozing off to my voice as a form of survival. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post in the comments your location and what time it is where you're listening. I always love seeing the spread of night owls and early risers across the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're a child, padding across polished stone floors that echo with the sound of sandal straps. The Palace of Nineveh looms around you vast, decorated with carved reliefs of kings trampling lions, gods with wings, and soldiers dragging prisoners. But instead of running to the training yard, you sneak toward the corner where the scribes sit, bent over clay. They press sharp reeds into wet tablets, their hands dusty with drying earth. You're supposed to be learning archery, but you'd rather watch how a word takes shape from wedges. Ashurbanipal is that boy, and you are him. The Assyrians believe in teaching princes how to fight wars, not how to conjugate verbs in Akkadian. Still you lean in, whispering questions to the scribe, who probably sighs and mutters, "This kid's going to rule us with grammar." Historians still argue whether Ashurbanipal's early obsession with cuneiform came from sheer curiosity or a shrewd recognition that words outlast swords. Either way, you're already unusual. The palace is crowded with relatives, brothers, half-brothers, cousins, all technically candidates for kingship, which makes family dinners slightly tense. You nibble dates while your father, Esarhaddon, coughs into his sleeve. Everyone pretends not to notice. The empire stretches from Egypt to the Persian Gulf, massive jigsaw puzzle of conquered peoples, and you're expected to one day handle it. But you, meanwhile, are mentally cataloging which tablet belongs to which myth. You're also a child in a brutal household. Assyrian kings are not exactly known for gentle parenting. Probably get speeches like, "One day you'll command armies of thousands, so stop doodling in clay." But you doodle anyway, making tiny lions in strange shapes, just to see if the symbols look right. At night, you lie on a mat listening to the hum of the city, the donkeys braying, the guards calling across the walls, the splash of buckets in the Tigris. You picture rows of tablets stacked neatly, each one a voice that could whisper across centuries. You don't know yet that one day those stacks will be your real army. One quirky fact. Some scholars believe Ashurbanipal could actually read and write himself, unlike most Assyrian kings who only listened to texts read aloud. In royal circles, literacy was for servants. For you to handle a stylus directly was almost scandalous-like, a modern king insisting on doing his own tax returns. You delight in the scratch of reed against clay. It's messy, but it feels powerful. Still, childhood is never safe. Plagues roll through the city. Rival claimants to the throne stir rebellion. Omens are read in sheep livers. Yes, priests literally poke sheep organs and announce destiny. You listen, pretending to be serious, but you can't help thinking that liver looks like it's predicting indigestion. Gentle sarcasm aside. Those omens decide war and peace, and you know one day you'll have to pretend to believe them too. You trail after tutors who drill you in military drill anyway. You march with wooden weapons, sweat under the Mesopotamian sun, and collapse wishing you were back in the cool archive rooms. Your brothers laugh they'll be warriors, while you, they say, are a librarian. Yet deep down, you suspect a librarian can outlast them all. Mainstream fact, Ashurbanipal was the last strong king of the Assyrian Empire, remembered both for conquests and his legendary library. But for now, he's just a boy leaning too close to drying tablets, while a scribe swats him away before he smudges the wedge marks. The empire outside the walls groans under the weight of tribute. Caravans arrive with lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, cedar wood from Lebanon, horses from Anatolia. You watch the wagons pass and wonder about the stories each traveler carries. Instead of picturing how to tax them harder, you imagine what their songs sound like, how their scripts might be written. Curiosity is your secret rebellion. Historians still argue whether Esarhaddon intended you to inherit the throne or merely a governorship. You're not the eldest. You're not the obvious heir. But your father notices something in you that patient obsession with detail, maybe. For an empire that could crumble under neglect, perhaps the boy who loves records is safest. Night after night, you fall asleep, tracing invisible, cuneiform signs in the air. Lines and wedges, tiny but eternal. The palace snores around you, guards pace, lions pace in cages. But you dream of rows upon rows of stories pressed into clay. And one day when you rule, those stories will multiply until Nineveh itself becomes a library. You're a little older now, still wandering those same corridors, but the stakes are higher. The Palace of Nineveh, ice and tea, just filled with carved walls and scented and scent. Also a nest of family tension that could rival any modern soap opera. You move carefully, because every cousin, uncle, or half-brother seems to have an eye on the throne. Dinner conversations are less about pass the bread and more about pass me the crown jewels, or else. Your father, King Esarhaddon, is constantly managing this delicate balance. He has multiple sons from different wives, and the royal harem is basically a powder keg of jealousy and plotting. You, Ashurbanipal, are not the oldest. You are not the strongest. But somehow, you're noticed. Your quiet hours with the scribes and your sharp mind for details set you apart, even if your siblings tease you for being bookish. Mainstream fact. Esarhaddon formally named Ashurbanipal as his successor, passing over older brothers in the process. That move alone nearly sparked civil war. Historians still argue whether Esarhaddon chose you for your intellect, your obedience, or simply because the other boys seemed too ambitious and dangerous. Whatever the reason, the decision painted a massive target on your back. You picture the moment clearly. The royal court gathered, courtiers, lined up in shimmering robes, the smell of oil lamps and pressed flowers filling the hall. Esarhaddon announces his will the son. The quiet one with ink-stained fingers will rule after me. You feel the gazes land on you like arrows. It's flattering and terrifying all at once. From that day, your every move becomes political. Walking in the gardens, someone whispers you're plotting alliances, asking about the grain stores. It's evidence of your shrewd fiscal policy. Sneezing in the library, rumor has it the gods themselves are sending you signs. One quirky fact, ancient Assyrians took sneezes very seriously, as omens whether good or bad depended on the timing and the priest interpreting it. Imagine being a teenager where every sneeze could be taken as a statement of destiny. Family life grows stranger. Your brothers grumble. Some leave to govern far-off provinces, where they quietly gather loyal troops. Courtiers smile at you, while secretly writing letters to other heirs. Your mother advises caution, warning you not to trust anyone even the cook. You start tasting your food carefully, wondering if a little extra spice might actually be poison. Still, there are comforts. The palace cats rub against your legs. The musicians play lyres at dusk, their strings humming with melancholy. You spend hours with scholars who indulge your curiosity, showing you tablets of omens, poems, even medicine recipes. You learn about crocodile dung mixed with honey as a supposed skin balm. Yes, that's real. And yes, it smells exactly how you're imagining. But even while you're laughing at odd remedies, the shadow of responsibility looms larger. The empire stretches impossibly wide from Egypt in the west to Elam in the east. Rebellions bubble constantly. You hear messengers arrive breathless, reporting uprisings, bandits, and betrayals. Your father looks older every day, weighed down by the strain of ruling. You begin to understand that one day his coughs will stop and the throne will fall squarely on your shoulders. In your quieter moments, you sit by the Tigris and watch the water flow, murky and unstoppable. You wonder what kind of king you'll be. A warrior, a builder, scholar. Historians still argue whether Ashurbanipal's reign was defined more by his libraries or his wars. In truth, you probably wanted to be remembered for both. Even if future generations would only keep one image, the king who hoarded words like treasure. At night, your dreams are filled with strange blends of the two worlds. You see armies marching, but instead of spears, they carry reed styluses. See palaces rising, but their bricks are clay tablets stacked into towers. By war, that Sega, I remember. The palace intrigue doesn't stop, of course. There are whispers that some of your half-brothers plan to challenge you. You overhear courtiers muttering about better candidates. One evening, you catch a servant hesitating before handing you a cup of wine. You smile, you sip, and you keep breathing because sometimes the best defense in Assyrian politics is simply not dying. And so you learn to tread carefully, balancing study with statecraft. Your father is grooming you for kingship, and you know it's only a matter of time before you have to prove yourself not in the library, but on the throne. For now, you turn another clay tablet over in your hands, pressing the wedge of your reed into the wet surface, leaving marks that may last longer than you ever will. You sit cross-legged in a room that smells faintly of damp earth and warm oil lamps. The scribes shuffle in, arms stacked with wet clay tablets. You've officially declared as the king's chosen heir, that you learn cuneiform properly, not just the lazy royal version, where you nod sagely while someone else reads aloud. No, you insist on doing the hard work. And everyone stares like you just announced you'd rather plow fields than inherit the palace. Mainstream fact. Ashurbanipal was unique among Assyrian kings in being literate. He claimed he could read and write cuneiform himself. That set him apart from nearly every other monarch of his time. For most rulers, literacy was beneath them. For you, it becomes a point of pride. You press the stylus into the clay. Wedge here, wedge there. Slow and awkward, your hand cramping, but the marks appear like magic. At first you ruin more tablets than you complete, smearing symbols into meaningless blobs. The scribes roll their eyes. Majesty, one mutters. You're not supposed to touch the clay, but you keep going, determined. Historians still argue whether this literacy was exaggerated later to burnish your reputation, or whether you really did spend hours hunched over clay. But you know the truth. There is no thrill quite like cracking open a tablet of an ancient myth, reading the wedges yourself, and realizing you're hearing a voice from centuries past, unfiltered. The tablets contain everything. Omens, laws, trade agreements, recipes. Some are dull lists of sheep rations that could put even the most energetic listener to sleep. Others are thrilling tales of gods battling sea monsters, heroes defying fate. Find yourself drawn to both ends of the spectrum. On one hand, you love a good epic. On the other, you think, who knew we needed to count so many sheep? One quirky tidbit, the scribes occasionally doodled on tablets, small sketches of animals, even caricatures of officials. Imagine flipping through an official legal record and finding a crude cartoon of the chief tax collector with donkey ears. You chuckle, the scribes blush, and suddenly the dusty clay feels alive. You train your memory too. Scribes test you by reading passages aloud and making you repeat them. You get scolded when you drift into daydreams, usually imagining the clay tablets stacked into fortress walls. In your imagination, each word is a brick that builds a kingdom more enduring than any battlement. And yet the lessons aren't just academic. The priests slip in omens and rituals, teaching you to connect the stars above to the marks on clay. You retaught to read the heavens the way you read words. Orion is not just a hunter, it's a prophecy. You learn that eclipses terrify kings, that the gods scribble their own tablets in the sky. You smile politely, but inside, you're wondering whether the gods could maybe write a little more clearly. The days are long. Riding practice, you're hauled off to train in archery or chariot riding. You sweat in the sun, legs wobbling as you balance on a chariot's narrow plank. You'd rather be back in the archives. Still, you keep one eye on the clay marks you left earlier, drying in neat rows, and at night, you sneak into the storerooms. Piles of tablets tower around you, legal codes, dictionaries, old myths. You light a lamp and whisper the words to yourself. The room grows hot, the air dusty, but you don't notice. You're lost in the lines. Your favorite? The Epic of Gilgamesh? You trace the story with your stylus, imagining the king who sought immortality, but found only stories. You wonder if you're walking the same path. One scholar watching you mutters, "This boy will either save us with wisdom or ruin us by reading too much." Historians still debate whether your obsession with books weakened your focus on governing, or whether it made you one of the most visionary rulers of the ancient world. You fall asleep one night with your cheek pressed to a drying tablet, the wedge marks imprinting faintly into your skin. The scribes find you in the morning, amused and exasperated. They scold you gently, but cannot hide their admiration. After all, how many princes leave the training yard early to curl up with a chunk of clay? The empire rumbles outside, rebellions stirring, rivals scheming, but in your little corner, you're discovering something stronger than armies: the permanence of words. One reed stylus, one wet slab of clay, and you're already etching yourself into history. The sun rises hot and harsh over Nineveh. They step out into the palace courtyard, where messengers are already running in and out, breathless, clutching scrolls and tablets. You've been declared heir, and now you begin to see the true size of what you're inheriting. The Assyrian Empire sprawls across more land than your sandals could ever cover. From the deserts of Egypt to the mountains of Anatolia, from the Persian Gulf to the edge of the Mediterranean, it all belongs technically to you and your family. And with that ownership comes headaches. Many, many headaches. Mainstream fact: by the time Ashurbanipal came to power, the Assyrian Empire was the largest the world had ever seen. Armies were stationed across hundreds of miles. Governors collected tribute from dozens of subject peoples, and rebellions simmered constantly. You don't inherit a peaceful garden, you inherit a boiling cauldron. You walk through the palace gates and into the streets of Nineveh. The city is buzzing. Merchants from every corner of the empire display their wares, lazuli shining blue, ivory carved into delicate combs, spices that make your nose twitch. Caravans clog the roads, donkeys braying as drivers shout. You hear snippets of different languages, see strange clothing styles, and realize this empire is stitched together from dozens of cultures. It's impressive and fragile. Historians still argue whether Assyria's vastness was its greatest strength or its undoing. You, standing amid the chaos, can feel both truths pressing down at once. So much wealth, but so many people ready to rebel if you slip even slightly, your father reminds you daily. A king must be strong, or the empire will eat him alive. You nod, but inside you wonder if being clever might be even better than being strong. Armies can win battles, but libraries can win centuries. Still, you practice both. In the morning, sword drills. In the afternoon, reading contracts about how many goats to send from one province to another. One quirky fact: tribute to the Assyrian court often included bizarre items, giant monkeys, rare birds, even a crocodile or two. Imagine waking up one morning, opening the palace gates, finding a crate labeled "Caution, crocodile, do not shake." You laugh at the absurdity, but those tributes are signs of power. Every exotic animal is a reminder. Someone far away bowed to you. You accompany your father on inspection tours. Together, you ride out in chariots, the wheels rattling, the sun beating down. You visit garrisons where soldiers drill endlessly, spears flashing in the light. You see captured cities rebuilt with Assyrian designs. Walls higher, gates wider, statues of winged bulls guarding every entrance. You nod like you approve, but secretly you're cataloging the sites, noting which places would make good stories to record later. And then there are the roads. Endless, dusty roads, stretching from one end of the empire to the other. Messengers gallop along them, carrying orders sealed with clay. Without those roads, the empire would crumble. You realize quickly that ruling is less about glory and more about logistics, how to keep supplies moving, how to get troops where they're needed, how to make sure the tax tablets add up at the end of the month. Historians still argue whether Ashurbanipal was truly hands-on with administration, or whether he left much of it to officials while he buried himself in his library. But here as heir, you're forced to learn both. You must listen to governors drone on about harvest yields, and then switch instantly to generals arguing about siege tactics. It's exhausting, like binge-watching the most boring and violent series ever created. You find humor where you can. During one council meeting, a general rants about horse rations for half an hour, and you almost burst out laughing. You think if he complains any longer, we'll need rations for me just to survive his speech. You manage to keep a straight face, though, because being heir means learning how to look solemn, even when you're dying of boredom. Back in the city, you walk past walls carved with scenes of kings hunting lions. The reliefs are brutal arrows, piercing beasts, chariots rolling over them. Everyone sees power and domination. You, however, wonder what happens to the lions when no one is watching. Do they sneak out at night to reclaim the empty fields? You chuckle to yourself. Maybe one day you'll carve your own wall showing a king. Reading it would confuse everyone, but maybe that's the point. The empire looms large, heavy with glory and threat. You're still young, but you can already sense that your reign will not just be about keeping the borders safe, it will be about finding a way to make something lasting out of all this chaos. And in the back of your mind, you imagine shelves upon shelves of clay. Each tablet, a little anchor, holding the empire in place, even after the walls fall. You're sitting in a quiet corner of the palace again, away from the shouting generals and the endless parade of tribute animals. This time, though, you're not just reading someone else's clay tablets, you're restarting to think about making your own collection. Begin small, almost by accident. A scribe sets aside a tablet of omens for you. Another hands you a myth. Before long, you have a neat little pile. And you, Ashurbanipal, heir of a bloody empire, realize you'd rather hoard stories than silver? Mainstream fact, Ashurbanipal is remembered above all for founding one of the first systematically organized libraries in history, the Library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh. Thousands of tablets collected from across Mesopotamia ended up in your care. Some were borrowed politely, others, let's say, borrowed forever from conquered cities like Babylon. Without you, much of Mesopotamian literature, including the Epic of Gilgamesh, might have been lost. It doesn't start with grand speeches. It starts with curiosity. You ask a scholar, where can I find the old tales of Sumer? He sighs, digs through shelves, and hands you a cracked tablet. You grin the way a modern reader might grin at finding a rare book in a dusty shop. Slowly, the idea forms. What if all the tablets could be gathered here, safe from war and fire? Historians still argue whether you consciously thought of posterity or whether you were just indulging your own obsession. Did you say future generations will thank me? Or did you just think, I want all the stories? Either way, the result is the same. A royal library unlike anything the world had seen. One quirky fact. Some of your tablets had property of Ashurbanipal. Scratched onto them basically the ancient equivalent of writing your name on the inside cover of a book. You were the kind of king who labeled his collection. Imagine scrawling, "Return to Ashurbanipal," or else in cuneiform wedges. You chuckle at the thought, because you know no one would dare keep overdue books from you. You begin commissioning scribes to copy works. Priests arrive with bundles of texts on medicine, astronomy, and rituals. Captured scholars are ordered to bring their lore. The pile grows. Soon your little corner becomes a room. The room becomes a hall. And one day, the palace corridors echo with the shuffle of scribes carrying clay trays stacked high. Meanwhile, you still play your part in the larger theater of empire. You attend councils, nod solemnly when tribute lists are read, and stand tall at ceremonies. But the real excitement is when you slip away and unwrap a new shipment of tablets, like a child sneaking a peek at gifts before a festival. The smell of clay and straw wrappings is better to you than incense. One evening, you examine a Babylonian medical tablet. Describes how to treat fevers with a mixture of beer and herbs. You read it aloud, and a servant laughs nervously. You grin and say, perhaps I'll test it on my brothers first. Your humor is dry, your audience nervous, but you enjoy the joke. After all, beer as medicine. You almost want to invent a prescription slip just for the novelty. You start to notice something else. While your generals boast about cities conquered and walls built, you think about how those victories vanish within a generation. But the tablets, fragile as they are, can whisper across millennia. Words survive even when empires don't. It's a thought that comforts you when the political world feels unstable. Historians still debate the exact number of tablets in your library. Estimates range from 20,000 to over 30,000 fragments. But the sheer volume is staggering. You aren't just building a hobby collection. You're building the first great archive of human thought. You do it with a zeal that sometimes makes courtiers roll their eyes. Our king loves clay more than gold, one mutters. You overhear, smile faintly and think, yes, and the clay will outlast your muttering. Your favorite part is the myths. If scribes read you stories of gods fighting chaos, of humans wrestling with fate, you savor the rhythm of the words, the way they lull you even as they echo with meaning. Sometimes you fall asleep, mid-reading, the tablet slipping from your fingers, your snores filling the archive. The scribes shake their heads gently, but they keep reading anyway. And so, the beginnings of your library take shape not with trumpets or proclamations, but with a young king stealing moments to surround himself with stories. The empire outside demands blood and tribute, but here in these dusty halls, you're quietly building something that will outlive both. The word spreads that UV inherited not only the crown, but also the endless headaches that come with it. The throne looks glamorous on the palace wall carvings, but in reality, it means you're now chief accountant, general, and reluctant road inspector all rolled into one. And while you'd rather be checking the cataloging system in your growing library, the empire insists on war. Mainstream fact: Ashurbanipal commanded campaigns across Egypt, Elam and Arabia, extending Assyrian influence farther than ever. His reign was marked not just by collecting clay tablets, but also by brutal conquests that made the empire both rich and unstable. You don your armor, which feels heavier than the crown itself. The sun burns down as you stand in a chariot, reins in hand, trying to look majestic while secretly worrying about falling off. The generals cheer, the soldiers stomp. You smile faintly, thinking, all of this just so I can go back and read in peace. The first march is long and dusty. Donkeys bray, soldiers grumble, carts creak. You hear the beat of war drums, but your mind drifts to the shelves back home. Still, you know that to keep those shelves safe, you have to keep the borders secure. Armies are the price of libraries. Historians still argue whether you personally led the battles or directed them from afar. But the official records depict you as both planner and participant. You picture yourself standing in front of lines of soldiers, making stirring speeches. In reality, you're probably muttering, "Let's finish quickly so I can get back to my tablets." One quirky tidbit: some campaigns involve moving entire populations. When a city surrendered, its people were marched hundreds of miles to new lands. It sounds harsh, and but the goal was to break rebellions by scattering them. Can't help but imagine how annoying it would be for the locals. Just unpacked our goats, and now we're moving again. The battles are loud, chaotic, terrifying. Arrows hiss, shields clash, war cries rise. You keep your composure, though inside you're thinking about which myth best describes this noise. Maybe it's like the gods' battle against Tiamat, the sea monster of chaos. Maybe the battlefield is just one big, muddy tablet, and every fallen soldier is another wedge pressed into the earth. When the dust clears, you ride back into Nineveh with prisoners, treasure, and crates, a view guessed at more tablets. While generals brag about their victory, you rush to inspect the new texts. Your eyes light up when you find unfamiliar omens or a new variant of Gilgamesh. The scribes groan because they know what's coming. Copy these, catalog them, add them to the collection. Historians still argue whether your obsession with collecting knowledge was a way to compensate for the bloodshed of your campaigns, or whether you simply saw both as parts of the same destiny war to gain power, books to preserve it. You sleep poorly during these campaigns. The ground is hard, the air thick with the smell of sweat and smoke. You roll over, wishing for the cool, dusty scent of clay in your library. Yet you know this is necessary. Every night you tell yourself, keep the empire strong today, so the tablets survive tomorrow. So you march on. A warrior by necessity, a reader by desire. Your soldiers see you as the king of conquests. You know yourself as the king of collections. Both truths march side by side, like twin columns of an army in ease, but inseparable. You're back in Nineveh after months of dusty marches and noisy camps. For once, no one is shouting about horses or chariots. Instead, the palace hums with the slower rhythms of daily life. You walk through the courtyards where servants sweep. Women chatter at weaving looms, and priests argue endlessly over whether a sneeze at sunrise is lucky or disastrous. You take a deep breath and realize this, too, is the empire less blood and conquest, more routine and ritual. Mainstream fact: Assyrian kings presided not just over armies, but also over the daily functioning of the empire markets. Temples, agriculture, even family law. You're expected to oversee everything from grand campaigns to the price of dates in the bazaar. Your mornings start with food. Trays of bread, honey, figs, and dates appear, along with bowls of yogurt that sometimes taste fresh and sometimes questionable. You nibble, half listening as officials drone on about tax lists. One quirky detail. Assyrian records mention rations of beer being standard for workers and officials alike. Yes, you could technically start your day with a pint. You take a sip once, and the court stares will. The king slur his decrees before noon. You grin and deliberately set the cup down. You stroll the gardens, shaded by imported trees. Water trickles through canals, cooling the air. You pause to watch gardeners carefully trim bushes into shapes that vaguely resemble lions. Soldier jokes. Majesty, at least these lions won't bite. You laugh quietly, thinking of those hunting reliefs where the lions always look more tragic than terrifying. Then come the priests. They argue over omens until your head spins. One claims a bird's flight predicts victory. Another insists it means famine. Historians still argue whether kings like you truly believed these omens or simply played along to keep the priests happy. You sit through the debates, nodding gravely, and privately wonder if the gods might be clearer if they just wrote you a letter. In the afternoon, you slip away to join scholars. They show you medical tablets with bizarre recipes. To cure toothache, recite this spell while chewing onion. You raise an eyebrow and mutter, or I could just not chew onion. The scribes snicker nervously, but you can't resist poking fun. Even in solemn Nineveh, sarcasm is your secret survival tool. Evenings are for music. Lyres pluck gently, flutes sigh, and singers chant old hymns. You sit back, eyes half closed, imagining how the sounds might be carved into clay. If only someone could figure out how to write music. The palace glows with lamplight, shadows stretching long. Feel for a moment almost at peace. Yet even in peace, you're learning. You watch how markets bustle, how servants gossip, how priests negotiate. You realize that empires are not just won in battle. They remaintained in the quiet routines of kitchens, gardens, and temples. The clay tablets recording grain shipments may look dull, but they are the veins that keep the empire alive. And so, as you sit under the lamplight, turning a dried date between your fingers, you think perhaps the true story of Assyria is not only in kings and wars, but in these tiny daily details that no one sings about. The shuffle of sandals, the hiss of oil lamps, the endless arguments about omens. All boring enough, maybe, to soothe someone to sleep. The peace of Nineveh never lasts. Word arrives that Babylon is restless again. Messengers burst into the palace. Clay tablets clutch tight, reporting rebellion and insults muttered by rival kings. You sigh, setting aside your latest mythological tablet. Because here we go again, the endless dance of conquest and cataloging. Mainstream fact: Ashurbanipal fought repeated campaigns against Babylon and Elam. These weren't small squabbles, but massive confrontations that defined his reign. Syria could never ignore Babylon. Too close, too proud, too dangerous. You prepare the armies. Horses snort, chariots creak, and the soldiers chant oaths that sound terrifying to outsiders, but oddly comforting to you. The generals sharpen their weapons, but you secretly sharpen your curiosity. Because you know that every conquered city doesn't just bring tribute, brings texts. You march south through the plains, dust rising, heat pressing. The soldiers complain of thirst, but you keep your eyes on the horizon. You imagine Babylon's towering walls, its temples stuffed with clay treasures. Your generals dream of gold. You dream of shelves of tablets. You don't say it out loud, but part of you thinks, this war is basically an interlibrary loan, just with spears. Historians still argue whether Ashurbanipal genuinely cared for the politics of Babylon, or whether he saw the city mainly as a cultural prize. You certainly didn't ignore its danger. Babylon was always a rival, but your personal letters hint at a hunger for its scholarly riches as much as its land. The battles rage. Catapults fling stones. Soldiers clash at the gates. Watch the chaos from your chariot, dust stinging your eyes. A soldier asks for orders, and you mutter, "Don't smash the temple tablets." He blinks, then realizes you're serious. One quirky tidbit. Captured Babylonian scholars were often deported straight to Nineveh, where they were put to work copying texts for your library. Imagine the grumpiest exchange program in history. Congratulations, you've been conquered. Please begin copying star charts. When the city finally falls, the palace overflows with spoils. Gold, ivory, exotic animals, and your favorite crates of clay tablets wrapped in straw. You grin like a child opening gifts, turning over each one, deciphering titles. medicine, astronomy, law codes. You stack them higher and higher, ignoring the blood still drying outside. The generals boast about victory. You nod politely, but your real triumph lies in the dusty cargo being hauled back to Nineveh. Soldiers joke that their king measures victories not by bodies but by tablets. They're not entirely wrong. Historians still argue whether this obsession weakened Assyria by focusing energy on culture instead of defense, but you believe you're building something stronger than walls. A memory of civilization itself. Cities burn, but words endure. And so, Babylon becomes both enemy and donor. Every campaign deepens your empire's reach and fattens your shelves. You return to Nineveh with wagons full of knowledge, already planning how to organize it all while the generals still clean their swords. The empire applauds your victories, but you smile quietly, because you know what really matters. In the shadow of war, you're building a library that might just outlast every city you've ever conquered. You're home again in Nineveh, and the empire, as usual, wants you to prove your greatness, not only with victories, but with monuments. Kings before you carved their names into colossal walls, raised statues taller than houses, and dug canals that turned deserts into gardens. You, Ashurbanipal, are expected to do the same. So you summon architects, builders, and enough workers to populate a small town, and you begin your building projects. Mainstream fact: Ashurbanipal oversaw major construction in Nineveh, including palatial expansions, canals, and decorative reliefs. These works reflected both Assyrian might and his personal tastes, blending traditional kingly display with his unusual scholarly bent. The palace walls rise higher. Reliefs are carved with scenes of lion hunts because what is an Assyrian king without at least one mural of him stabbing a lion? You stand there while artisans chip away at the stone, occasionally suggesting they carve a few scribes as well. They laugh, unsure whether you're joking. You're joking, mostly. You commission new canals to bring water into the city. The engineers boast about their precision, claiming the water will flow as smoothly as beer from a jug. You walk along the half-dug trenches, sandals caked in mud, listening to their arguments about gradients and flow rates. Historians still argue whether these projects were genuinely innovative or just expansions of earlier works. Either way, they keep the city green and the gardens lush. One quirky fact: Assyrian kings loved to inscribe the bricks of their buildings with their names. Every brick carried a line like "Property of King Ashurbanipal, favored by the gods." Imagine if every cinder block in your house today had the builder's autograph. You chuckle, thinking that somewhere, future archaeologists will be sifting through rubble muttering, yes, we know it was Ashurbanipal already. The gardens bloom.
Ow.
Date palms sway, figs swell heavy, flowers perfume the air. You walk slowly, trailing your fingers along the leaves, pretending you're enjoying the horticulture. In truth, you're counting how many tablets could be stored in a chamber beneath. Every irrigation canal looks to you like a potential library basement. Historians still debate whether your palace at Nineveh influenced the later myths of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Some claim visitors confuse the two. You certainly don't mind the comparison. If your name echoes alongside wonders, so much the better. At night, you pace the new halls. The stone floors cool under your feet. Oil lamps flicker against carved reliefs of battles you fought half-heartedly, but must now immortalize in stone. You pause before a panel showing yourself shooting arrows at lions, the beasts collapsing in dramatic poses. You sigh quietly, muttering, "If only they'd carve me with a tablet instead." The building projects drain treasure, but they also proclaim power. Visitors arrive from distant lands, awed by the towering gates and winged bulls. They leave with stories of Nineveh's grandeur, spreading your fame farther than your armies ever marched. You listen to their praise politely, but deep inside, you wonder if they'll also remember the library you're quietly filling in the background. And so, you build walls, canals, gardens, and palaces, because that's what kings must do. But when the workers rest and the chisels fall silent, you slip away to your tablets, running your hands across the clay, whispering the stories that no wall carving could ever capture. The palace is bustling again, but this time, it's not soldiers or builders filling the corridors, it's scholars. You summon them from every corner of the empire. Astrologers from Babylon, physicians from distant cities, omen readers with liver diagrams, mathematicians with dusty tablets of numbers that look like alien puzzles. They arrive grumbling, some happy to have royal patronage, others sulking because they'd rather be in their own temples. But here they are under your watchful eye. Mainstream fact. Ashurbanipal employed teams of scholars to copy, translate, and debate thousands of works. His library contained texts on medicine, astronomy, law, mathematics, and literature. This was not just casual collecting, it was organized research, the closest thing to a royal think tank in the ancient world. You stroll into the chamber where they're working. Tables are piled with damp clay, styluses clatter, and arguments hum like bees. One scholar insists that a particular star chart means doom. Another says it means prosperity. You sip your beer ration, raise an eyebrow, and mutter, well, maybe it just means stars exist. They glare. You smirk. One quirky tidbit. Babylonian scholars sometimes wrote letters of complaint about their work conditions, griping that they weren't given proper food or that their fellow scribes were lazy. Imagine ancient workplace drama, preserved forever in cuneiform. You laugh when one of these letters is read to you. See, even geniuses still whine about lunch, you mutter. The scholars produce wonders. Medical texts describing how to set bones, charms to ward off demons, star charts predicting eclipses. You collect them all, not just for their practical use, but for the beauty of preserving thought itself. You walk among the shelves, fingers trailing across drying clay, imagining them whispering knowledge long after you're gone. Historians still argue whether you genuinely believed the omens and spells, or whether you saw them as cultural treasures worth preserving regardless. Perhaps it's both. You chuckle at some absurd remedies like bathing in beer for certain ailments, but you also see their value as a record of human ingenuity, however odd. Sometimes you join the debates scribbling notes of your own. The scholars are shocked to see a king pressing a stylus into clay. One whispers this is beneath him. Another replies, or perhaps it makes him greater. You just smile and keep writing because to you, the act of learning is never beneath a king. At night, the chamber glows with lamplight. The scholars argue, the tablets dry, and you sit quietly, eyes half closed, listening to the gentle scratching of reeds on clay. To others, it's noise. To you, it's the sound of eternity being written one wedge at a time. The palace may glitter with gardens and new walls, but court life is never as polished as the carvings suggest. You sit on the throne, trying to look majestic, while disputes shuffle in like restless sheep. One noble accuses another of stealing goats. Merchant insists his neighbor sold him fake ivory. A priest complains that a rival priest looked at a liver the wrong way, and every single one of them expects you to fix it. Mainstream fact. Assyrian kings held the highest judicial authority. He could confirm sentences, overturn rulings, or invent punishments altogether. Justice was a royal performance, and sometimes a peculiar one. You listen patiently, though inside you're sighing. These Iran-T epic wars or grand treaties, they re-squabbles that would barely fill half a tablet. Still, you rule. Sometimes it's fines, sometimes exile. Sometimes it's just glaring until everyone apologizes. One quirky tidbit. Unusual punishments in Mesopotamia included forcing wrongdoers to parade through town with symbolic objects, like carrying a brick on their head to represent debt. You chuckle when you imagine sentencing a merchant to walk around Nineveh with a fake goat strapped to his back. Historians still argue whether your justice was harsher than your predecessors. Official reliefs show you as stern and commanding, but letters suggest you could be wryly tolerant, letting scribes note down absurd disputes with barely concealed amusement. You once scrawled on a tablet margin, "This case is nonsense," which might be the ancient equivalent of writing LOL in official paperwork. Even in serious trials, the rituals could be odd. Priests sometimes insisted on ordeals where the accused swam across a river to prove innocence. You sat there, arms folded, muttering, or maybe he's just a good swimmer. The priest frowned. You smiled. Court life is a carousel of repetition. Petitioners bow, complain, argue, bow again. You try to keep a straight face when one noble dramatically faints at your feet after losing a case. You resist the urge to roll your eyes, though later you joke to your scribes. Next time, bring a cushion for fainting nobles. Yet beneath the humor, you sense the importance. Justice keeps the empire together as much as armies do. A goat dispute in Nineveh could ripple out, shaking loyalty in provinces miles away. So you listen, you decree, you balance severity with wit. At night, when the court finally empties, you retreat to your library, where the only arguments are between gods and myths or scholars and commentaries. Compared to the chaos of real court life, those clay quarrels feel soothing. Words may clash, but at least they never faint dramatically in front of you. The palace is quieter tonight, though not silent. You sit in a side chamber surrounded by tablets stacked like bricks, and you realize something you've been ignoring. Your body is not invincible. The cough that lingers after a long march, the dull ache in your joints, the headaches that creep in after hours of squinting at clay by lamplight, these are reminders that even kings break down. Mainstream fact: ancient Assyrians, like their neighbors, relied heavily on a mix of herbal remedies and magical incantations to treat illness. Ashurbanipal's library preserves some of the oldest known medical texts, filled with recipes and rituals for healing. You leaf through one such tablet now. The instructions are both practical and absurd. For fever, boil willow bark. That makes sense. You would even think, oh, so ancient aspirin. But then, for cough, recite this spell while smearing pig fat on the chest. You sigh, rubbing your ribs, and think, maybe I'll just take the willow bark and skip the bacon. One quirky tidbit. Some remedies involved crocodile dung mixed with honey, supposedly to protect the skin. You imagine yourself smeared in that mixture and nearly choke laughing. Yes, you mutter. Nothing says majestic king like smelling like swamp desert. But underneath the jokes lies worry. You've seen your father waste away with sickness. You've watched generals grow frail after decades of campaigns. You know no army can defeat the quiet assault of disease. At night, lying awake, you wonder if your library will outlast your body, if your words will continue even when your cough silences you. Historians still argue about Ashurbanipal's health. Some suggest he suffered chronic ailments from his campaigns, while others think he aged relatively well compared to his predecessors. The truth is hazy, just like the lamplight that flickers across your weary face. You try the remedies anyway. A poultice of herbs on your temples, a whispered charm to banish nightmares, a warm bath infused with oils. Some soothe you, some don't. The priests insist the gods must be appeased. They slaughter sheep, peer into livers, and declare omens. You sit there, sore and tired, thinking, if the gods wanted me healthy, maybe they'd prescribe sleep. And so, you learn another truth. Even in the height of power, fragility lingers. You can command armies, build canals, and fill libraries, but you can't order your body to stop coughing. That vulnerability makes you more determined. If you can't last forever, then your tablets must. Your words, your collections, your library, they will be your second body, your stronger one. You close your eyes, breathing slowly, the scent of herbs in the air. You imagine the tablets lined up like guardians, each one a shield against forgetting. And you whisper, almost like a prayer, let them last, even if I don't. The palace corridors echo differently now. It isn't the scrape of styluses or the murmur of scholars that fills the air at ease, the heavy clank of armor. You can feel it before the messengers even arrive. Rebellion. Not from distant tribes, not from nameless provinces, but from within your own family. Brothers, cousins, relatives who once bowed, now sharpen their knives in the shadows. Mainstream fact. Ashurbanipal faced revolts, led by his own brothers, particularly Shamash-Shamukin, who ruled Babylon under him, but eventually declared war. Family loyalty in Assyria was always fragile, and succession disputes turned deadly quickly. You read the tablet detailing the rebellion. Cuneiform wedges press into your chest like stones. Your own brother, raised in the same palace, tutored by the same scribes, now dares to raise an army against you. You sigh, half amused, half weary. Couldn't he just borrow a tablet instead of trying to steal a throne? You mutter. The city tightens. Soldiers drill endlessly in the courtyards. Generals bark orders, and you sit in council chambers, face calm, voice steady. Inside, though, you feel this sting. Blood betrays blood. Historians still argue whether Shamash-Shamukin was driven by personal jealousy, Babylonian nationalism, or the sheer impossibility of living in your shadow. You suspect it was all three. You write out again, armor gleaming, though you'd rather be in the archives. The battlefield this time is personal. Armies clash not just against strangers, but against kin. The soldiers know it, to their chants are harder, angrier. You keep your composure, though your mind drifts once more. What story will be carved on the tablets about brothers who destroy each other? One quirky tidbit: records say omens before the rebellion included eclipses, which terrified the court. Priests debated wildly, some claiming the sun's disappearance meant divine wrath. You dryly remarked, or perhaps the gods just wanted a nap. No one laughed, too nervous, but you couldn't resist. The war drags on. Cities burn, refugees pour into Nineveh, and the strain grows heavy. You don't show it, but you feel it in your bones, in your lungs, in the weight pressing behind your eyes. Rebellion is never just about army. It's about tearing trust to shreds, and once torn, it never mends. Historians still debate how ruthless you were in crushing the revolt. Some accounts paint you as merciless, others as reluctant. Either way, victory comes at a cost. When Babylon falls, it's not triumph you taste but ash. You sit amid the ruins, a tablet in your hand, whispering to yourself, "Clay endures, die." But flesh always turns to dust. The empire is quieter now, but it's the heavy quiet of exhaustion, not peace. You sit in your grand halls, surrounded by tablets that whisper endlessly, while outside the walls. The empire trembles like an old lion, too proud to admit its bones ache. Armies are thinner, provinces restless, and even the palace feels less secure than it once did. You feel it in your chest. The long reign is bending toward its end. Mainstream fact: Ashurbanipal's later years are obscure. Records of his final days are scarce, and historians still argue whether he died peacefully in Nineveh or amid chaos. What is clear is that after his death, the Assyrian Empire rapidly unraveled, collapsing within a few decades. You retreat more often into the library. The clay shelves are your companions, each wedge mark a heartbeat steadier than your own. You tell yourself, if I can't stop the empire from crumbling, at least I can make sure its stories remain. And so you spend your hours cataloging, organizing, demanding copies of texts that might otherwise vanish. One quirky tidbit: some tablets from your library contain colophon scribes. Notes at the end of the text that beg future readers not to erase or mishandle them. On even warns, "May the gods curse him who destroys this tablet." You chuckle softly, stroking the clay, and whisper back, "Don't worry, little one. I won't let you be broken." Outside, though, you hear the tremors. Envoys bring news of rebellions flickering back to life, of enemies massing at borders. Even once subjugated peoples sense weakness. You nod calmly at their reports, but in the stillness of night, you admit to yourself, you cannot fight forever. Historians still argue whether your later years were filled with despair or quiet determination. Some imagine you clutching your tablets desperately as the empire fell apart. Others picture you resigned, watching with detached wisdom. Perhaps both are true. You sit there, stylus in hand, inscribing your name on clay, knowing that kingship is temporary, but words are not. Your body is weaker now. Coughs last longer, the aches sharper. You let generals handle more of the campaigning, while you shuffle between the archive and your chambers. Courtiers bow, but you see it in their eyes. They smell the end approaching. At night you lie awake, the flicker of the lamp stretching shadows across the carved lions on your walls. You whisper to yourself, armies die, walls crack, cities fall, but a single tablet, if hidden well, can outlive them all. It's not just comfort, it's a vow. And so, in these last days of power, you lean not on your armies, but on your books. You surround yourself with the hum of scribes scratching at clay, the faint dust rising in the air, the endless stories of gods, kings, laws, and omens. If your throne is slipping away, you will at least ensure that your voice, and the voices of countless others, remain pressed into earth, waiting for hands centuries away to read them again. The lamps burn low in your library, and you move slowly among the shelves. Your steps echo on stone floors that once shook with the boots of armies, but now tremble only with your own weary coughs. The empire is crumbling. Your spies tell you so. Your generals confirm it. Provinces slip away like sand through fingers. Enemies gather at borders. Even within Nineveh, there are whispers of unrest. But here, in this hall of clay, the world still feels steady. Mainstream fact: Ashurbanipal's empire collapsed soon after his reign. Within a few decades, Nineveh itself was sacked and burned. Yet his library survived in fragments, preserved by the very fires that destroyed the city. Baking the clay tablets hard enough to endure, you pause before a shelf stacked with myths. Your hand hovers over the Epic of Gilgamesh, the story of a king who searched for immortality and failed. Smile faintly, whispering, "You didn't find eternal life, but your story did." You recognize yourself in him, king, conqueror, collector trying to push back against forgetting. One quirky tidbit: many tablets from your library carried duplicate texts, copied obsessively as if you feared one wasn't enough. Future scholars chuckled at the redundancy, but to you, it was protection. If walls fall, at least one copy might endure. You grin softly, muttering, "Better to many than none." Historians still argue how exactly your final years ended. Whether you died quietly in Nineveh, whether you were caught in the storms of rebellion, or whether your death marked the very tipping point into collapse. The records blur. Your life ends in mystery, but your clay whispers on. You lean against a shelf, weary. Outside, you hear faint rumblings, maybe thunder, maybe the drums of enemies drawing closer. But you no longer flinch. Your armies may falter, your palaces may crumble, yet these tablets to your real empire will survive. You press your palm against one, feeling the cool clay, and you breathe slowly. This, you whisper, is the kingdom that lasts. And now the story slows, softening like the last glow of lamplight fading across the carved walls of Nineveh. You picture yourself no longer as the king weighed down by rebellions and armies, but simply as a quiet figure sitting among rows of tablets, the air filled with the gentle hush of dust and silence. The empire outside may crumble, but here, inside these cool halls, time drifts differently. Each clay wedge is a heartbeat, steady and calm, carrying voices across centuries. You let your shoulders sink. The roar of soldiers and the clamor of court disputes fade into the distance. In their place comes the soft shuffle of scribes, the faint scratch of styluses, the almost musical rhythm of marks pressed into clay. It is slow, unhurried, and endlessly patient. Just like your own breathing now, steady and smooth. Imagine the flicker of oil lamps, casting golden light across shelves of tablets, each one a silent companion, keeping watch through the night. The world outside grows dimmer, the sounds softer, until even the great walls of Nineveh are no more than a blur in memory. What remains is the stillness of words, pressed long ago, waiting quietly for someone far away, far in the future, to discover them again. And as you rest here, surrounded by this calm, you can release the weight of conquest, the worry of rebellion, the ache of sickness. You don't need to hold them anymore. What you've left behind, the stories, the knowledge, the careful marks in clay will linger for you. So close your eyes, let the hum of history cradle you, and drift gently into sleep, as if you were one of those tablets, safely tucked away in the quiet library of Nineveh.